We are live here, Stonesaga Q&A. How's it going, Max and Luke?
It's
I
going
always
pretty
feel so
good.
I always feel so disingenuous asking how it's going, because we've been already chatting for 15, 20 minutes. So hey, for all of you out there, we're doing good. We were already chatting about the weekend there. Max and Luke did some live playthroughs of Stone Saga demoing at a game shop in the Twin Cities called
Source Comics and Games.
Source Comics and Games. So for all of you Twin Cities fans, I hear it's a big spot.
And we'll be back there next weekend and the weekend after, too.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. So we're going to dive into some questions. Really excited to dive into some questions. Max just posted a big update. It's on BGG. It's also in the last Kickstarter update. And I'm trying to think what else. We're nearing our $1.3 million fundraising goal. So we are at 1.276 million Canadian. Really excited about the stretch goal, which is legendary resources and items.
Right.
It's like it's fun. Like it's kind of in some ways it's like end game content, right? You know, when we think of like classic MMO stuff, this is like late game. This is late game,
Mm-hmm.
and I know there was a comment in
BlackRock Spire, at least.
Yeah. There's a comment like looking like wanting a reveal of like the legendary stuff, and there's two things. So my gut is like, no, I don't want to like spoil that for anyone. And then the second gut is like, well, actually, we don't have artwork yet for those. So,
we can show the ones with my artwork.
Yeah, we could show the exclusive. You can pay extra to get a Max Brook. We can do a foil version of your.
Don't offer that. Somebody will want it.
I know. Anyways, hey, thanks for being here, everyone. I just want to jump right into it. So, probably the easiest thing with the questions. You know what? Let me. I'm going to share my screen here because I think sharing the screen, we can kind of go over the, let me see here. Yeah, we can see this. Okay. And let me just zoom in a little bit so that everyone can have it. So this is on BGG, and we'll get to a few other questions that have kind of popped up elsewhere. But we are going to just kind of roll through this. If you have questions live while we're chatting, feel free to type them in. We'll interject your comments as we go. So I'm not going to attempt to pronounce your username here, but hey, thank you for the congratulations. And thank you all for making Stonesaga such a good start. So, first question from Luke Eddy. What's the best pizza topping and why is it pineapple? Well, let me just start by saying it is not pineapple. It is my favorite. My favorite type of pizza.
That's debatable.
Yeah, it's true. I like a margarita pizza with prosciutto.
Okay.
With prosciutto
that is
on
pretty
top.
Good.
That's tasty.
Does cheese count as a topping, or is cheese? How much cheese counts as a topping?
Okay, and now on to our Stone Saga questions. All right, so Ian Noble has the question. The character setup, rolling dice and picking 4 seems a bit too random. Will there be suggested setups based on number of players added? Something like, everyone gets 14 to 16 points to customize their characters and how they want. Let's talk about character setup.
Yeah. So go ahead, Max. Okay. All right. So we are tweaking some of how character setup starts. So currently you actually roll 5 dice. There's 4 stats. You roll 5 dice, and then you're going to drop the lowest dice. You're already getting an advantage there. Currently you re-roll if your total is, I think it's like 13 or lower across all 5 dice. We're going to raise that threshold, right? So we haven't tweaked the exact numbers yet, but the other thing Max and I have talked about is including as an alternate to assign certain just, base values. For people who want to opt into using, sort of fixed stats instead. It'll be a lot less spiky than getting to roll your own dice. You will probably sort of just have an average stat distribution. But we've talked about including that as an option.
And I think we'd probably go with an array model rather than point buy.
Yeah.
Point buy. The nice thing about arrays is, we get some native variants in there, and it has a nice simple approach to it too. It's just assign these numbers out. I'm sure somebody will figure out how to derive a point buy from it, and cool. But we'll probably just go with an array. It's nice and simple.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things is, and maybe this is where the crossover of like tabletop role playing game players and board gamers, I think they would catch on to this in a way, because for those who kind of like embody the character that they are, there's actually something really funny about having a character. There can be something really funny with having a character that's like no good at anything, or only good at one thing, and then like pretty like average or poor at the other things. But totally understand, this, and I think we're gonna, as is it Max or Luke who's fond of saying, we're gonna have our cake and eat it too.
Yes.
So that's good. Moving on to a YouTube question. Edward Longbottom asks, how much do the one-player rules change a game? So we're talking. There's true solo and multi-handed. Who wants to take this one?
I'll take multi-handed because it's really easy. The multi-handed rules don't change the game at all. I guess they technically, there are a few things where they explain to you that there will not be multiple players, so you don't need to worry about it. But if you're playing multi-handed, the rules don't change at all.
Yeah. And then for true solo play, one of the things we're adding to the game, we talked about for quite some time, like what sort of assistance would a true solo player get, where you really are just controlling one character. And there's definitely an action economy loss, but you also lose quite a bit of just like space to hold stuff. So we talked about implementing. He shows up in the art a lot, but a sort of beast of burden companion to help you hold items and resources and food and stuff like that. And for the expansion, then we came up with animal companion rules, and we're like, all right, great, we can apply these to that sort of solo companion animal that we had talked about adding. So you'll have a beast of burden, an aurochs who can carry extra gear for you. But I think besides that, the game isn't really going to change in any way for a true solo experience. And that's intended. Like, I think just explicitly the true solo experience is intended to be harder. It's more of a challenge. To go at it completely alone is going to be a challenge. And you'll have sort of that action economy loss, where you really have to make sure each action you take is impactful and gets you the resources you need. But at the very least, that companion alleviates the problem of not being able to just hold as much stuff.
Yeah.
We've also, something I've been thinking a lot about that actually we need to have a chat about, Luke, is I think there are some items we may want to do a little tweaking to rebalance around true solo. For instance, I was thinking about how it's easier to die in true solo because you don't have the ability to have someone else pick you up. But maybe some of those medical items you can discover could have a utility that's a little more like self-healing in addition to healing other people to help offset that a little bit. So there may be items or even structures that are much better in true solo than they are in a multiplayer game, because you have or multi-handed game, because you have this, like, it helps you deal with something that's a bigger problem than it would normally be.
Yeah, that's great. So Ian also asks, and I've seen a couple other questions about this, and so I think it's great to talk about. I've heard some concerns about the mining action. Searching in a bag for a specific shape sounds like it could be too easy, or at least too easy to quote unquote game. Max, maybe talk about this. This was like one of the first ideas, concepts. So, share your thought process.
I think also just Brendan and I were not believers. Max
we
had a lot of faith. So go ahead, Max.
So I started this out, and I made a set of mining tokens out of Sculpey, and they were cut to specific shapes that I cut them to by hand, and some of them had scorpions on them. And so you'd pull the thing out, and sometimes you'd pull one out with a scorpion and get hurt. That was sort of before they had the omens on them. And I was convinced that this activity was going to be hard enough. Luke and Brendan didn't believe me, but we actually
you're
played
gonna
it.
be able to tell. You can feel what they are.
And that was actually why we added the omens, because it was like, okay, you can't feel the omens, so there's still an element of like risk and reward, and you're choosing how much you push your luck, etc. But honestly, in every test we've done, it's pretty hard. It's surprisingly difficult.
Surprisingly hard.
I'm sure some people will be great at it. I bet if you
but that's fine. More power to them. If they are good at it, they should be the minor of that group then.
I bet if you've done activities that really require you to focus your, like your fine motor skills and your like sensitivity of your fingertips, that will probably be a big advantage. But if you
reach into bags often with a bunch of mystery items and are told to identify them, then you're gonna be great at this activity.
Well, I'm curious too about like other activities as well. Like for instance, I would have to imagine that like if somebody knows how to read Braille, they'd probably be very good at this.
Hey, actually, that's smart.
Yeah. Because it's a similar like understanding the sensitivities of a physical object. So it's just sort of a skill that I don't get much of in my day-to-day life, but some people might be really good at. So I don't know. We'll see. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, maybe a wood carver, someone who's carving whittler, a whittler.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
See that.
So yeah, it's honestly it's pretty neat. I thought it was more. What's the word? I don't want to say gimmicky, but I thought it was more gimmicky than it actually ended up being. Like it's actually like a very cool experience. Okay, Tom D asks, do the expansions make the game easier? And so by the expansions, just a little overview for those of you who are joining. We have Meals and Myths expansion, which introduces a whole cooking mechanic. I believe a 5th player mechanic, a new Behemoth. And then we have the Nature of the Beast, which introduces a handful of
companions.
I don't know the number. Is it 5 or 6?
Oh, it's 6.
It's 6, right? Because we unlocked one. So okay, let's just chat about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in some ways, the answer is maybe more complicated than just a yes or no. But in some ways, yes. They do add. They're not intended to up the difficulty explicitly. And having those extra options of, you have some food and you're like, okay, what if I cook this, and I'll get an extra benefit out of being able to cook it, so, and same with the animal companions. Having an animal companion is, an asset that you have access to. So in that way, yes, but in other ways too, sort of like a lot of, the difficulty of Stonesaga in general is that you only have so much finite time during each challenge to pursue sort of extracurricular activities and goals, and the animal companions, this is not something we got into in the update talking about it, since a lot of it is still in development. But the working idea is that the animal companions are not just automatically unlocked. You have to discover some way, and that leads to a goal that then requires working towards befriending the animal, or figuring out where it actually lives, or feeding it, or something like that. So it's not just automatic. So you're devoting extra time and resources towards unlocking this thing, and that adds difficulty to a given play session. If you weren't trying to do this extra goal on top of, your regular sort of vital goals set out by the challenge itself, that's more resources and time you're devoting to doing something else. So to unlock these things, same with cooking too, it's the recipes are not, known. So you have to experiment, and there's a small risk factor of, food missing the pot, ingredients not ending up combining in ways you thought they would. Where sort of like crafting, there's a little bit of trial and error. It's much more forgiving. You're going to get something out of cooking. So it takes time away from potentially, just, the simplicity of just gathering food and eating that food and knowing what you're getting out of it. So just in the terms of that, these are assets you unlock that give you more decisions you can make. Yes, that does, make certain aspects of the game easier, but at the same time, like the things you have to work towards, things you have to discover. And in that way, they have their own sort of difficulty.
But it's interesting because the difficulty in Stonesaga like basically everything that you're unlocking throughout the game, not everything, but a lot of it actually makes the early stuff that was difficult easy.
Right? And that's intended.
Yeah. So like, and it's a survival game in that sense. And so I feel like Animal Companion is all these, recipes, like, unlocking a spear makes fishing easier. Right. So there's this natural progression, and the expansions kind of just add in other ways that, you unlock these things and it makes these previous things, easier. Right. And that's, a part of the loop that we have. Max, anything you want to add on this, or was that good?
I would just say that they make the game wider.
Yes.
They probably do make it easier, especially if you went in with perfect foreknowledge, they would probably make it easier. But if you don't go in with perfect foreknowledge, they probably don't make it appreciably easier. So yeah, I think they probably could make the game easier, but they might make it harder if you decide to pursue some difficult goal that's like a cool side goal, but is taking away from your main goals and is causing you these headaches and such. Yeah. So I think they make the game wider.
Okay, I'm going to move on. There's these next two questions that are actually kind of similar. So we have on Board Game Geek, Vasfer in 1996, and then YouTube. We have this comment: in the next stretch goals, are there any potential elements that could bring a new experience, something we haven't seen yet? So they're just kind of curious about, hey, is there any kind of other gameplay elements that we haven't talked about or revealed? And then Vasfer in 1996 is asking, he's saying, frankly, what draws me to this game is exploration and premise of survival. So that kind of classic survival game. Looking for a hard game that won't forgive mistakes. Is Stonesaga hard to beat? ? Are there any plans that had difficulty levels to the game? Thank you. So I'm going to say a few things just because we've been having a few conversations kind of internally, and there's a couple directions in mind. There is a quote unquote, for those of you who are listening here, a secret stretch goal that is coming up that has not been revealed. I think it might be the $1.35 million stretch goal where we do talk about this. So you know what? I guess consider this the reveal moment. So there's a couple things that we're talking about. Let me maybe mention this difficulty level piece first. I guess there's. Max, Luke, go for it. Tackle this.
Well, I can tackle it briefly. Yeah, just in terms of, we touched on difficulty a little already. Like a lot of it is opt-in, where it's like, how much are you actually going to try and tackle in a game? How many of these optional goals are you going to try and do? To answer, this question specifically about wanting a game that is hard and doesn't forgive mistakes. The early game of Stonesaga is very tricky. It can go wrong. As you have to learn how to efficiently gather food, or there's a curve you can start to fall behind. Now you can't it's very hard to really complete. Well, actually that's not true. It is entirely possible.
It is entirely possible to get your civilization wiped out in those early games.
Yeah. It is actually true.
It does take a few points of failure.
I was thinking of you do always get some energy back each round.
So
yes. You can't start a day phase unable to do anything.
Yes. You can't soft lock yourself or hard lock yourself. But if things go wrong on a macro scale, your civilization can end up having some real problems, shall we say.
Yeah.
And then I was just going to add, in terms of difficulty levels, one thing that, our sort of current working model is that, and this is true of the prototype as well, that of the optional sort of starting zones, some are, there's a little bit of variability there, where it's like the Verdant Vale, that one is slightly easier than if you start at the Skyreach Plateau, for example. So if you want a harder experience right from the get-go, you can start in the region that has just slightly scarcer resources.
And a couple things that we want to implement, and we're not 100% sure how they look like, but there's this thing in video games. I think I'm reminded, like Elden Ring, they you beat the game once, and then a new option opens up.
Plus.
Yeah, new game plus. right?
I thought you were going to say invasions, Brendan. I thought you were going to say that you want to implement a feature where one of the developers rolls up and flips over your table.
Hey, that would be fun too. But this idea of New Game Plus is something that, you know, I'm really interested in. I actually think it's really easy for us to implement. I think there's a few kind of like conditions that could be kind of placed on the character, you know, placed on the person's experience, where if you want to, like, okay, now you have a little bit of foreknowledge, right? You know how to make a bow easier. You know how to do these things. There's, you know, you won't have experienced the full game in one playthrough, but you want to like up that difficulty curve. There's a lot of things right now where it's like, okay, for us, it's a couple dials that we can tweak, and suddenly the game is quite a bit more painful.
You know, another thing I was thinking about, Brendan, in the sort of New Game Plus in video games is mutators, like in like the Gears of War Horde mode or whatever. We could have a like set of cards you put alongside your game that like make, or like you know, like how in like roguelikes you can sometimes like crank up the difficulty after you beat it and go to like a higher tier.
Yeah,
we could do something like that potentially. That's an interesting idea. Maybe we'll come back to that.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. So that's one, and I'm actually getting ahead of myself because there's another question on the next page, which I'll answer it here. The other, so for those who are like Stonesaga, you know, I think for probably the majority of people, you know, a playthrough of the game is going to be like incredible. You know, it's like 30 hours. It's going to be this really kind of full experience. Maybe some just want to play an epoch, right? So that's, you know, 5 to 10 hours. So you know, different ways to engage the game. But for those who are like, hey, this is my game, you know, they love every element, right? You know, we're planning on, you know, some variation of New Game Plus. It's something that's very much in our kind of development kind of framework that we want to ship with that. And then, you know, we're also planning on, and this is a stretch goal. So hey, assuming we raise 1.35 million, we're also planning on including an open-ended survival mode, right? This, you know, I think it was very on probably when Max and I sat down and we played the first prototype, even before I think Luke joined the team. I was like, hey Max, like, can we just like add a game mode where this is like open-ended? Right. The game feels like you can do that. And you know, I think we're gonna have to, like any sandbox game, there has to be like walls to that sandbox. So we're gonna have to create some set of walls. But we're going to, you know, I want to include it in some shape or form. I don't know if either of you have like kind of shoot by the hip thoughts on that, but
I have some thoughts. I sent Luke some thoughts the other day about this. I think we can do a
disclaimer. Everything that is about to be said is not written in stone.
Yes.
Subject to change.
Subject to change, yes. I think we can actually do something where, so it would require a little bit of bookkeeping on the part of the players, but we could have a thing whereby if you wanted a, you know, like an open-ended experience where you could keep recombining the tiles in new ways, we could have a sort of a migration feature almost where like periodically you need to move. Yeah. And so like parts of the valley will go away and then you will be able to use those pieces and recombine them to create like unexplored content.
Yeah, it's cool.
That was something I was thinking about, chatting about with Luke the other day, that I think we could do something like that. It would, you know, require a little bit of, there'd have to be some reason for that to happen, but it would be an easy enough thing to seed into like some kind of deck of ongoing events that is like, just, you know, like, oh yeah, this region is now going to go away after this many activities. So don't be there don't be there when it falls off the world. Or the glaciers close maybe, or something, you know, it gets covered under ice or something. So that's something we've been thinking about, of like how to do that. That relates to another thing in one of the upcoming questions as well that we're going to talk about with table management.
Oh yeah. Okay. So let's hold. Thank you, Marcus T. You got a handful of questions for us. Before we get to that, you know, just a comment from YouTube. Arius mentioned that they're glad to hear that the game will have scale difficulty by personal goals. I enjoy an easier co-op experience and one focused on the story, exploration, crafting is perfect for me. Here's something that I should also add for variable difficulty. I'm playing in an open world game. Actually, Elden Ring is a great example. For people who want to make the game harder, guess what they do? They like run around like almost like half naked.
They start, right? They start as the wretch.
Yeah, right. And so there are so many self-imposed difficulties that you could have in Stonesaga. You're like, okay, hey, I'm not going to have any I'm going to do the least amount of base building as possible, right? You could like literally just do that where you're like this nomadic person, and that's going to be harder than having a having a base where you can come back and heal up and do all these things. And you can like or like, okay, I'm only going to be aggressive against the behemoth. You're only going to fight the behemoth. Like that is going to be harder than maybe trying to find some like secrets and stuff, right? So there's so many layers of self-imposed difficulty that you could have, which
any percent Stonesaga.
Yeah. Okay.
So Marcus, speed runs.
Table footprint. They've watched some gameplay videos that people have played from the demo, and the footprint size seems reasonable, 1 to 3 tiles. I think by tiles they mean like the trays, so 1 to 3 terrain trays. Does this continue through the adventure? What does the footprint look like near the end of the campaign? They're just wondering table space, like what's that going to be?
Stonesaga is not a small game on the table. Just to start with that, even with 1 to 3 terrain. Okay,
so we say that, but then if anyone has purchased our previous game, Stars of Icarios, it's not as much as Stars of Icarios.
Okay, that's a good point. That's a good point. It's that's a good point, because it's like compared to what, right? I'm used to trying to fit everything on a 3x3 grid. Darn it. And I will say, the game, I set it up the other day in person, and we got it pretty condensed in there. It was pretty tight. Especially if you have like a good management system for all the decks, and where you want to put them and all that. That's pretty good. So one thing is, you actually won't necessarily. So when you get into that late game, you won't actually necessarily need to set trays up until you intend to use them. So when you have that larger valley, some of the trays, if you're not going to go visit them, you could just leave them in the box if you're tight for space. That's something we've been thinking about, where it's like, mobility and how much you move around is definitely a thing, but there might be areas you could revisit, but decide, do we want to revisit that area or not? And you'll have you need to have a record of where all the, trays are. But that gives you a lot of freedom to say, like, here's here's what we're going to set out.
Right. The core game has 7 terrain trays. I think we've added 1 with a stretch goal.
Yeah, I think we're 8 terrain trays. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is a lot. But I think that for some people that is an appeal, right? Like that you can, your map can grow and sprawl to that size, but you don't necessarily need to have all of them out at once. Like, for example, you may have moved far enough into exploration of new regions that other ones that you started at are so far back, like it's not realistic that you're going back there anymore in a given game.
And so Marcus is an Icarios backer, as I am seeing here. So frame of reference for you, Marcus, the player boards for Stonesaga are smaller than the Icarios player boards. And I actually think with the tiles out there, it's smaller than like the Icarios like game mat, and then the game board that you're flying around your ships. And in some ways that is more modular, right? So yeah, you're saving. I want to move on just because we got a lot of questions. So
I will say there's a really good question on YouTube.
Which one?
When I play a challenge and end it with a save, can, for my next session, a friend join for maybe the next 2 challenges? Absolutely. That's one of the things from definitely the beginning, and something I harp on every time I play, any co-op game is like, there's like, you got to have drop in, drop out these days. Like there's no excuse not to. It just makes for so much more of a flexible, inviting experience. So yes, absolutely. You can have people drop in and drop out. There's very little that is like of the game that's like stuck to the characters. Like you save like a character's items and some of their resources at the end of the game, but those can always be like bequeathed to another character, you can start a new one, or maybe a character has aged out, or at the end of a scenario, those items are passed on to another character. So yeah, another player can absolutely join. And touching back on some of the rules we were talking about earlier, like there's a very little that actually changes between how many players are in the game. There's not like some other rules overhead that changes as you change player count. It's the player boards themselves. It changes like how much energy you get back based on how many people are playing or how much health you have. So like we've designed the game 100% to facilitate drop in and drop out co-op.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. The mining tokens are acrylic. Why are you making the other tokens out of wood? So first question. So yes, mining tokens are acrylic. It feels more like stone than wood would feel like stone in a bag. Purely the question. And then the other tokens we're aiming to have wood. We're kind of going back and forth through manufacturer right now. And I think that's just a personal preference with the three of us that we would like the tokens to be those tokens to be wood, screen printed, all that nice stuff. The ones that are being upgraded in the non-mining upgrade pack, so the deluxe token upgrade pack, is every token that is on the player board, that goes on the player board. So your energy, your health, your the food, all those tokens, food, water, except
boost tokens,
except the so all the ones are working there except the resource crafting tokens. Boost tokens actually for me have an asterisk beside it because it depends. I think the screen printing on the boost tokens might be harder. The other ones are actually pretty like low key for the screen printing. So basically everything on your board except the craft tokens, because the craft tokens have full pictures. It's a lot much more detailed. We have to keep those punch. Okay, moving on. Where are the trees being planted? In Canada. That's as much as we know. This is we partner with Tree Canada, and they choose the best place in Canada to plant. I think last time it was in British Columbia, and I think we're up to how many? I forget how many trees it was, but like 9,000 trees planted. Wow. I think is what it was in partnership with. Yeah, there's like a whole forest. That's a lot of trees. Stonesaga Forest. That was our step to reduce carbon footprint, like it was in Mythwind. Mythwind, I believe we just planted trees. These games we make to be replayable. The only elements in Stonesaga that are used are like the character cards and the outpost cards, but recyclable as well, those ones. But the rest of it, we're like
they're not destroyed. They do stay part of the gameplay experience too.
Exactly, and the rest of the game, we're like, hey, we want people to play this for a long time, and then when they're done playing it, pass it on, right? And it's meant to be like that. Okay. Caniers says, with the Animal Companions expansion, Nature of the Beast expansion, do you automatically start with a companion, or are they something that is discovered at some point in the gameplay, which Luke talked about?
We touched on. Yeah, hopefully we're planning sort of like maybe a concrete example would be, again, and this is in development, but like, perhaps with the expansion adds in a forage card where like, oh, you can see like a little egg peeking out of one of the nests in the trees, and it has like a, an omen symbol on it. You investigate the omen, and it's like, oh, hey, you found it, an egg, and you decide to keep it, and then like you need to like care for it. It puts a goal out, and it's like, each night make sure the egg is like warm and safe, and then like
after the bird egg.
The bird hatches, right? Exactly, and then you would have the companion. So we're hoping to make sort of each one a little bit bespoke and different and interesting. So it's not just like you buy the expansion, it's like, hey, all right, now we have animal companions. It's more interesting than that.
Yeah. I'm just, I think you guys are all ready for the glowworm. I know, Max, you were a big worm guy.
I was on Team Glowworm.
I was Team Mole, but I'm still happy with the
Same.
worm. So Timo has a question, and wow, Timo, great timing. You said Doe missed the start, but guess what? We just are getting to your question now. You're playing through the demo on TTS, and it's lots of fun. Hey, awesome. Happy you're having fun. Your question is, when investigating an omen, some results say that they are repeatable and some say they are not. How often are results repeatable? For instance, can all 4 characters investigate an omen if it matches the current omen and they have the opportunity, or is it restricted to once per challenge or something else entirely? Okay, Timo's going into the weeds here.
Yeah. So this is something that we late on before the beta went out, we realized we needed to we needed to decide whether events were repeatable or not. I'm going to say that my on the fly ruling, Timo, is that they are anything that's repeatable can be done once a day at most. And that will probably be in the final rule book, probably, unless we come up with a better solution. Yeah, I think for repeatable ones, probably it'll be once a day. So
yeah, that's great. Okay. Oh, we had someone apologizing. Zomer Droman was apologizing for writing such a long post. Hey, no apologies. You know, we're going through it. This is why we're here. Okay, sorry, I'm not gonna butcher your name and mispronounce it, but first of all, thanks. Oh, hey, you're saying thanks for making this project. Thank you for backing the project. When are you planning to finish production and start shipping? Our current timeline is to enter into production and translation in the fall of this year, 2023. So that's going to kind of happen simultaneously. We'll go into mold production, kind of first samples, and then our translation partners will also get the copy. And then we, hope, my personal hope, we'll see if it happens. My personal hope is to have the game leaving the factory before Chinese New Year 2024 and have it delivered in everybody's hands by the end of April 2024. This is all languages. So I know there's that's one of these questions. Thank you. So this is all languages. We print them all at the same time. And this is actually, it saves us cost. Because when, let's say they're printing a rule book, right? Instead of they have to set up the machine to our, certain specifications. And then instead of resetting it up, in a month or 2 months after we get the translations, if we already have the translations finished, they can just change the plate out with the, with a different language and then print those. So we try to do all of the language component printing at once. And that's kind of the stage where we're at with Mythwind right at the moment. Samples of content in other languages before I make the final decision on languages I want. I don't think so. And that is because we have to place so your question number 2, can you wait till you see a sample from, whatever language partner that we have? My answer, we have to do our quantity order before the translations are finished. And that is because, they have to order all the paper, and that whole process is a month or 2 to kind of, we place our order. Hey, we want 10, 20,000 units. And that all comes in. Yeah. So my answer is no, because we lock the pledge manager before we place the quantity. And that's, the pledge manager is where you're choosing your language. Okay. Whew, that was good. Gazilla answering that best pizza topping is the one with grilled behemoth.
Oh no.
That's intense. Okay. So this is great. This is a question. I'm not going to read the whole question, but it's primarily about narrative, and it's touching on our the blog post from today. So if you haven't read it, I think it's on BGG. It's also in our Kickstarter updates. Maybe we can, Max, Luke, touch base on, hey, what is the narrative in Stonesaga? One of the questions that people have been asking is is the narrative, something like Gloomhaven or Stars of Icarios, where it's kind of hey, there's this big story and you're working through, and it's kind of like a choose your own adventure story, but really kind of directive, or is it something a little bit more emergent? Is there narrative? What's the case with Stonesaga?
Yeah, go for it, Max. You wrote the blog post.
Yeah, I was just writing about this today. I would say that Stonesaga has a sort of a core of pre-written narrative, but we've tried really hard to make sure that there's a lot of space for people to have unique story experiences in that. So each epoch, a campaign covers, sort of the history of a people in this valley. Each epoch is kind of one, sort of sweeping set of events that take place over a couple of generations. And then each challenge is kind of a chapter in that book that is the epoch. there are some of those chapters that some of those challenges you're definitely going to see. Not many, but a few. There are some of those challenges that you will probably see depending on your choices. And then there are some of those challenges that you like may or may not see depending on secondary things. So it's kind of a modular structured approach where there's a skeleton of events that are probably going to happen that you're probably going to see relating to the core themes of the epoch. So there's a game in Epoch 1 where the Behemoth arrives. That happens. It is possible that there might be, for that type of thing, in that particular case, there's only one, but it's possible for that type of thing that there could be a couple different challenges that hit that same plot beat if, like, the Behemoth arrives in a different way or whatever. Again, for that one, I think it probably is just one. But that's going to happen because that's a challenge. The way we've structured the challenge system, you're going to have to deal with that. The exact order that happens in with other events, though, could vary. You might have the opportunity to like try to sort of create a spiritual tradition around, the deceased members of your tribe, or you could tackle that Behemoth problem proactively. And you have a choice there of like, do you want to, undertake this thing to like, memorialize your, deceased ancestors, or do you want to go deal with the Behemoth problem? And so there's a degree to which each generation will have this chance to decide, like, oh, do we want to do this thing that we think has a useful developmental function? Or do we think we want to kick this can down the road a little further? And then eventually somebody has to deal with that. So there's a lot. Oh, sorry,
I was just going to say, I think to like maybe hone in on like this narrative. Never in Stonesaga is it like, okay, Bob and Jill like pick up a spear and it's not like that classic like storybook. It is more this like, oh hey, it's setting the tone of like, oh hey, there's this world, there's this thing that happened, or there's this challenge that's presented. But Max, maybe correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I'd say you're right. I think the key thing is we're really trying to set you up to write that Bob and Jill story. We're trying to set you up to tell that story where, Bob and Jill enter the valley and then they have some children, Bob 2 and Jill 2. And, Bob 2 and Jill 2 explore this area. And,
we hope you name your characters more interesting names than that.
Yeah, hopefully.
They explore this area and, Jill dies and Bob meets, like somebody, and then they have these children who go on to like, discover the caves underneath the valley. And then that knowledge is really useful when the Behemoth arrives. And so because the events, there are, there's high level events that happen, but there are very few low level events that are like, micro level events that are like guaranteed to happen.
I think maybe one way to put it is that Stonesaga is interested, rather than telling a story to you, Stonesaga is more interested in posing questions and seeing how you choose to respond. A really easy example is the Behemoth shows up. And it's not hostile, but it is a threat. It can cause damage to you and your people in the valley. How do you deal with it? Do you confront it proactively, violently? Are you trying to drive it off? Do you try to appease it somehow, find out what it likes to eat, or do you try to avoid it entirely? Maybe you move on and say, that's where the Behemoth lives now, right? And those sorts of decisions then lead to branching paths. But the game asked a question and you chose how to respond. And I think that's sort of, if people aren't as familiar with the idea of like an emergent narrative, that's maybe a good example, right? Where like the game is creating opportunity points for the player to make decisions that impact the world, in micro ways or macro ways, and also, small opportunities too. Just the story of like, you moved to a new hex and you drew a card that made you lose all your food, and now you have to like go fishing in this new hex, right? That's a little tiny micro story of like what is happening to your character that day. And so it's sort of this emergent narrative engine, both on a micro and macro level, that the game is trying to generate to sort of make what happens to you interesting.
Yeah, no, that's good. And Timo mentions a part of that emergent narrative, which is saying that he likes the legend mechanic to make every character relevant past the time they're actually they're actively being played. This is the idea that when your characters age up and then die, they don't the card doesn't get ripped up or whatever. They become legends that you can kind of use for different events, different abilities, all that fun stuff. Okay, I'm gonna move on because this is good. This is another big one. Eva, thank you so much. Game looks great. Excited to learn more about it. We've talked about the expansions. The expansions integrate, I think, like this into the campaign. So they're meant. It's not like, okay, finish a campaign now, then go on to the expansion one, and then go on to expansion two. No, they're you can cook from the beginning, right? You can begin your search for the egg bird, right, and these things. So that they're meant to be.
They're designed around the fact that these aren't expansion packs like Brood War was a StarCraft expansion pack. Boy, I dated myself with that reference. These are expansion packs that you will be glad are there from the start of the game if you want to use them, because they're very interwoven from the start.
Okay, this is a question that I want to dive into because we haven't talked too much about this. Will you show/explain some more of the differences between the behemoths? I actually think this is a good blog post for us, potentially. Of course, you don't want to spoil the surprise, but right now it's rather unclear what they do and in what way it would matter to have an extra behemoth. Hey, that's good. I would like to learn a little bit more about them and the mysteries that they present.
Yeah, go for it, Max.
Yeah, so the behemoths. Okay, so the behemoths are actually undergoing some post beta revision and in the exact details of how they work. We've gotten some good feedback from the beta. We think we have some thoughts about how micro level the details. If you go into TTS, the way they work today may not exactly reflect how they're going to work in the long run, because we think we have some ways to streamline and improve it. Basically, a better implementation of the same system. So the fundamental way the behemoths work, though, is at night they do stuff. And that stuff is based on an instinct. Having multiple behemoths means you have multiple big things walking around the valley doing their own thing that might affect you in some way. And some of them can be quite mean. Some of them are, they're meant to be these alien, intelligences that are very different from humans and very, very much working on sort of different axes and different, sort of like perceptions of existence. But some of them are, and some of them are sort of like casually destructive and don't really hold any ill will, but might accidentally, mess up your plans. But some of them are more aggressive and will come after you if they think you're a threat. And so, if you have multiple behemoths, they're going to interact. Another thing that we feel is really important too is, and this is again something that where the implementation is still coming together. The ones in the beta won't do this, but we feel it's important that if there are multiple behemoths on the board, they interact with each other too. Mm-hmm. That the behemoths will acknowledge and care about each other's presence. Their instinct cards will interact in certain ways. So one behemoth's instinct might tell it to go after the thing with the strongest strength. If that's
a Godzilla battle happening.
Exactly. The strongest might. So if a behemoth is told to go after the thing with the strongest might, well, if a player has might 6, it's going to go after that player. But if there's another behemoth, that behemoth is going to have might much higher than that player, and so it'll go after that. And we felt it was important that the behemoths have at least some ability to interact with each other and have some interplay there.
The question I think is also asking, because for most of the campaign, there's one behemoth in the valley. So, and the question is asking, why do I care that there's more than one in the box, right? And so the behemoths, as it currently stands, we're working on tweaking some of the mechanics, but they have instincts, which sort of tell them, what they're doing each night, where they're moving, what their goal is. They have a secret, something you can discover that will give you some advantage over it. Maybe it's an advantage in combat. Maybe it's, you find out something they like, it's a way to appease them. And then they have different reaction cards for when you actually encounter them. What is the test you have to do? Is it standing firm? Is it actually fighting against them? Is it dealing with sort of the environment they create around them? And those possible different traits, so their instinct, their secret, and then their reactions, those are bespoke to the different behemoths. So the different behemoths have different ways that they're going to be moving around the valley. the different behemoths have different kinds of secrets to unlock, and the different behemoths also react in different ways when you encounter them. So having the different behemoths, each one has sort of a distinct personality. And so, that's one of the main ways also, if you do get into replaying the game, having a different behemoth appear, in that very first epoch, has a significant, impact on, what are your challenges in that first, epoch. Is a different kind of behemoth, follow roughly the same rules, but, may have different goals, may have different sort of secrets, and, will react to you differently when you encounter it.
Okay. That's great. Great answers. We're going to wrap up in like 5 minutes. So we're not going to get all of these questions. And maybe we'll have to table these questions until next week. The plan, I think every Monday we'll be doing this as long as we're live. Great questions, Eva. Thank you so much. I'm gonna skip on here. Oh, okay,
I can very quickly speak to that setup and teardown.
Oh yeah, sure.
I just did it the other day, and it took me about half an hour to set everything up. But a huge part of that was that I don't yet have the trays that are going to be there to organize the components. So everything was just in baggies, and I don't yet have the. I didn't have a set of. I didn't have the terrain set up. I had to put it all together, and
my guess is that initial setup would probably be about half an hour, and then every subsequent setup I imagine is like 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's kind of right.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. Especially like the token trays, that's going to be crazy.
Sorting the tokens was most of that half hour.
All the decks will be like specifically labeled and all the stuff. It'll be good. Incredible conversation about one of the oldest cities in the world. Feel free to do it. Jeff asks a very hard question because I actually don't know the answer to this. Game looks neat. If you had to assign BGG weight to the game, what would it be? It's interesting because someone actually was messaging me privately on Kickstarter asking, hey, could my kid play this game? And, I was asking, hey, depending on the age of your kid, but in some ways, yes, because some of the turn-by-turn complexity, the things you can do in and of themselves aren't crazily complex. The weight of the game increases because we have multiple layers, right? There's all of these systems then that kind of get layered on top of each other. And I don't think it's cumbersome in the sense of upkeep, but you look at a tile and there's sometimes 5-6 different actions that you could do, not to mention crafting, right? So that's where the weight of the game increases. It's for somebody who maybe struggles with analysis paralysis, I guess there's maybe they'll have a hard time super optimizing, but there's just a lot of things you can do on your turn, and I think that's where the weight comes in. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's my.
No, I think if you have if your kid likes board games, I think if you're if you can be a good Stonesaga DM, then I think you can definitely play the game with a younger audience. If you focus on hey, do you want to do we need some food. Do you want to do some fishing? Do you want to do some foraging? Right. And sort of break this decision sort of down into smaller bite-sized chunks of do you want to do this or this? Or hey, we need some resources. Do you want to go foraging or do you want to go, mining?
I think having just looked at a whole bunch of BGG weight ratings for games I think the weight is somewhere between 3 and 3.75.
Yeah.
But that is a wide range, and I was surprised by some of the comparable weight ratings. I was surprised by how heavy Rebellion was weighted. I thought that would be lower, honestly. That game's
it gets pretty fiddly.
I guess it does.
Maybe it would be a little bit lower. I'm just trying to.
Where's Akarios is under 3. Okay, maybe it's under 3 then.
Maybe it's 2.75 to 3.
I don't know. I had to look at what is actually a 5. Are we talking the war games where you had to use a tweezers to move pieces around?
Well, I mean, God, I don't know. I was looking at X-Wing, and then I was like, that's a stupid thing to look at because that's gonna.
Arc Nova is
getting up there.
Arc Nova is a 3.71, and this game is not as complex as Arc Nova. I bet Gloomhaven. My bet is it's a 3.5. Oh my gosh, it's 3.89.
3.89.
Okay, but how much is weight the jokes aside, how much is weight is the actual physical weight of the product? Because like if you weigh Gloomhaven by like how much mental energy would it take to understand every aspect of this game, the box is real deep.
Okay, complete aside, ISS Vanguard was at my board game store, and I just like dropped way too much money on a copy of it. Okay, 3.55. Interesting. I'm excited to see that.
I was not expecting that to be lower than Gloomhaven. Okay, well, I think we've proven that we have no idea what the board game BGG weighting will be.
Jeff, we'll let you decide.
We don't have to read this whole question necessarily. I've read some of these beforehand, and Timo has a good question here that other people have brought up, which is currently in the prototype, there are some things that tell you to write a new ability that you gain into your rule book. So like you can't make fire right away until you like perform the fire making challenge, and then you can like make fire as a default action. Definitely, we would like to put some of those things on reference cards, because it's not just for fire making. Delving essentially is sort of locked until you get that goal. And we may have new regions of the game with new terrain features that you get new actions that you can interact with. So we'll be looking for ways to sort of incorporate those into the game as references rather than just having to write all of them down. I think is a good quality of life thing to include.
Yep.
Okay, one more question. Oh, thank you, Kraken.
That's not really a question.
You make this the best solo game of all time. This is a good question because we've had a lot of people, chat about this, and maybe they don't know the reason why we've decided what we've decided. So this is the question, and then I'll go into that. Is there any real asymmetry in how the characters play? The character boards have slight differences in health and energy stats. That's due to the character cards. There's nothing on the character board.
Well, I think they're mistaking the variable player number differences.
Yes. Okay.
Right. If you're playing with a different number of players, you gain different energy or have health tracks, but it's not different for each board.
Right. And then the question goes on, is there anything that makes playing the mantle of the protector, different than playing the mantle of the seeker or wanderer, versus what the mystic or seeker might do? How are the values for the traits on the character cards determined? So we've chatted about that, but let's take a step back. Okay. Character asymmetry. Why have we decided to go with the route we've decided?
So the reason the characters, the mantles are quite symmetrical in their sort of like initial outlay is because of the mantle powers you get, and the fact that you're slotting character cards and equipment onto them. So characters end up very asymmetrical very quickly, even without the mantles being different from each other. And again, what mantle you pick affects which mantle powers you have access to.
I think maybe something to lay out to make it clear is we're talking about three different things here.
Yes.
There's the character card,
yep,
which is totally separate from your mantle. You make that first, you roll stats, you pick a trait. As you play the game, you'll potentially add traits, potentially change stats, potentially add like marks to represent certain pivotal events your character was present for. That's one thing that's separate. Then there's your mantle board, and these are all completely symmetrical. Then each different mantle board has a name, and that board has access to a different set of powers that the players choose. So I think some confusion comes in when someone looks at the board and is like, hey, this is exactly the same, just the art is different. And they're right, but that doesn't mean they're symmetrical because each mantle has access to different powers, and those powers aren't printed on the board because each one has 3, 4, and maybe like 5 with the expansion.
It's 4 in the base game, 5 with the
TBD.
Expansion.
This is fascinating. So this is actually an issue on the Kickstarter page design. So this is I'll take the blame for this because what we should have done is when we have the characters, right? So we have the mantle board, we have the character miniature. We should have put 4 mantle powers with that miniature, and then we would have done that for each one, and then everyone would have known it's like, okay, there's these unique mantle powers for each of these mantles, right? But hey, live and you learn.
It's all right. I mean, it would have been immediate. Say each mantle had their power. They each had one power and it was printed on their board. The mantle of the Seeker just gets one of its powers is spend an energy, you can draw a discovery card without moving, and you get +2 when you resolve it, right? Cool little power that could be on the board. But we wanted to give each one multiple abilities to choose from, right? So those aren't printed on the board as a separate thing you select and add, but they're bespoke to the particular mantle powers, right? Or mantle, names, right? So Mantle of the Seeker has like 4 different powers it can choose, and those are all different than the 4 powers that like the Mantle of the Mystic gets to choose.
You know, it would be neat. Sorry, I'm just thinking about this right now. Project. I need to see what the mantle boards look like before I actually suggest anything. Come on. Okay, it actually would be really neat to potentially change this graphic design.
Yeah, well, this is one of the things I wrote down when Max and I were playing over the weekend, was like, hey, that's just blank right now. We should write in at least the name of the mantle in that hole to see like.
Oh, so that's great. But we could also make this not brown and make it like the background color, because then when you put the mantle ability on it, the little border matches up. So it would be like, for the Seeker abilities, they would be blue. For the these ones abilities,
that would look cool.
Green. And then and then it's at a glance, you're like, oh, hey, these 4 I can use with my person. So it's like, that's pretty neat. Okay, we are an hour, and I don't even know. I need to
we didn't even get to page 2.
Oh, we didn't get to page 2. I'm going to make a quote. We are here for answering questions.
What, Brendan? You don't want to jump into the surely quick conversation about apps?
Yeah. So this is great. I am more than willing to jump back on and keep on talking through these conversations, because great questions. I hope the response, it was fun. Thank you for the 20 plus of you that hung out with us for the past hour. If you want to, you can hang out with us again next week at this time. Any parting thoughts, team?
I think that's good. We covered a lot.
We did.
Luke, you're wrong about pineapple on pizza.
No, and the Legion community can back me up on this. It's the best option.
Okay.
Well,
okay. Hey, thank you all for joining us. And hey, if you're a backer of Stonesaga, we love that you're part of our community. If you're kind of on the fence, we hope this helped you decide one way or the other. Ultimately, we're just excited to finish making the game, to get it delivered in your hands, and to see all the crazy stories that are going to come out of it, because I think you're gonna love the experience. Great. All right, take care, everyone.
Thanks.